I'm back. Good evening, good day, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is where you're at when you're watching this. Thank you for tuning in, giving me your time and attention, because those are two things that you can't get back. So I wanted to do this video because I'm going to start doing more astrology videos, because that's what people keep asking for. In this particular video, I want to talk about the Monique and DL Hughly situation from the aspect of astrology in the context of the public and the context of the lessons that this interaction between DL Hughly and Monique brings, and also astrologically what it means to kind of give us a different lens to look at the situation from a different perspective. And it gives me a chance to actually highlight two zodiac signs that are very prominent during this pandemic. So that would be Sagittarius and Pisces. Monique being a Sagittarius, DL Hughly being a Pisces. So the reason why this is notable, and I was compelled to do a video about it, is because those two signs are mutable signs. And those two signs also are part of what's called a cross. So in astrology, there's 12 acknowledged signs of the zodiac. And those signs are broken up into many different ways, right? And one way that astrology is broken up into what's called crosses. So you have mutable signs, you have cardinal signs, and you have fixed signs, right? Each description of the signs represent a different aspect. I won't get too detailed on what cardinal signs, fixed signs, and mutable signs are, but for this video, I'll focus more so on the mutable signs, right? So mutable signs are your Sagittarius, Pisces, Virgo, Gemini. Those signs represent adaptability, how an individual adapts to their environment. Those four signs, those mutable signs, also represent knowledge, right? And how they go about in regards to knowledge, right? So each of them represent this different aspects of knowledge, and they represent different aspects of adaptability. In astrology, when you have these signs in your chart, they form what's called squares. Anytime you have squares in a zodiac chart or in a transit, typically that's when you have a hard time. So in life, we all go through hardships. Those hardships most likely are reflected in what's called squares in your chart. So in this case with Monique and DL Hughly, being that they are both mutable signs, Sagittarius and Pisces, they square each other. They're squaring off, so to say. So I wanted to highlight this because they both have aspects that make sense. When you look at both points of view, both Monique and DL Hughly make perfect sense, right? First, Monique, clearly she got on stage this past weekend in Detroit, and she blasted DL Hughly. Said all type of flagrant wild stuff against his character, accusing him of violating the agreement that was made by the individuals responsible for the show, I guess amongst themselves, being that she was supposed to headline, and he's saying that he was supposed to headline. So according to her, she gets into it. I don't know if she got into it with DL Hughly or in general with someone, because he wanted to headline. And he basically, according to her, said that if he doesn't headline, then he's not performing. So Monique, according to her, made a decision to please the crowd. Instead of not performing, she decided to just go ahead of him and perform for the crowd, just so they can get their money's worth and the show can go on, even though she's claiming that she's supposed to headline. Now, the big deal about this is that she blasted him publicly. And I've been seeing that some people are saying that she shouldn't have done this. Now, the thing with Sagittarius is they deal with social justice and social approval. Anytime you're dealing with anybody enacting social justice and social approval in general and in the public, they are using Sagittarius energy. Even if they're not Sagittariuses, this is the energy that they're using. So Monique is only doing what's in her element, right? She's only, I guess, wrong if she's lying, so to speak. Because if she feels, and this is pure Sagittarius nature that she's sitting in and doing this. If she feels that there is wrongdoing, right, and this is something that's under the table, that's not seen, her bringing it to the public is her way of enacting justice in an area in which there is no justice, because you have people that's in power that's practicing dirty deeds, doing dirty deals, and it's kept quiet and in private, and nobody knows about it, while she's made to look bad. This is a classic Sagittarius thing. Anybody with Sagittarius in their chart has the potential to lean this way. Even if you don't, anytime you feel wronged, and anytime you keep going through some kind of wrong, and you feel the need that there's no other recourse but to put it out in the public, because you feel that's the only way justice can be served, that's Sagittarius. They deal with outlook. Pisces deals with insight, which leads me to DL Hughly's response in his rebuttal. His rebuttal was completely opposite. He said that this is not something that you air in public, right? Because he's a Pisces. Pisces deals with insight. So you have outlook, which is the broader perspective, looking at externally at the situation, the so-called big picture. That's Sagittarius. Then you have insight. Pisces deal with the unconscious mind. Pisces deal with spirituality and reflection. So their go-to is to sort out their internal environment and then figure out a way to rise above whatever problems and hardships that they have identified as being an issue for them. So that right there is a clash, which is typical of squares. That's what squares do. Squares represent challenges and conflicts in order for the individual with these aspects in their chart to learn to rise above a particular challenge that they possibly did not learn in their previous life. Because that's all astrology is a blueprint for your life in the present. And it pulls upon aspects of a prior life, and it pulls upon aspects that you, being from your soul's contract, agreed to come here to learn and go through. That's it. Astrology is our contract. So whenever you see squares, this is what it means. It's not an evil thing. It's just meant to make you stronger. A lot of people that are prominent and they reach high levels of success, most likely they have squares in their chart because the amount of opposition that they had to overcome in order to achieve the high level of success that they did comes from them being in positions where they had to overcome these challenges represented by these squares. So when you see Monique and DL Hughly go at it like this in public, this is something that's bigger than them. A lot of people say that it shouldn't be, but when it comes to the collective conscious, which is what Pisces rules, you cannot fight it. And they're public figures. And a lot of times, public figures are vessels and their vehicles. A lot of them know this. And as vessels and vehicles, things flow through them that is higher than them. And if they're in tune with that, they go off of the spirit, or they go off of what they feel is right. And in so doing that, a lot of things will be made to the public. And that's what Monique represents. This issue is bigger than Monique, because if you look at what she was saying, she brought up Lee Daniels, she brought up Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey, Steve Harvey. Again, she brought up all these people again, and this is a whole new situation with a whole new person. So she's looking at the big picture. It started with DL, but really DL is now another player in a narrative that she's painting about people being coons, people not playing fair, and people having dirty practices. And a lot of times, not saying who's right or who's wrong, just looking at what's presented, when dirty practices are done by people of influence and in power, there's typically the notion of hush hush, keep it quiet, because that's the status quo. Sagittarians don't deal with that. When a Sagittarius feels that there's an injustice, there are no rules other than being ethical. So if there's an ethics violation, Sagittarius energy will absolutely bring it to the public, which is the court of public opinion. And therefore, just like a regular court, the people, which would be us, the jury, would decide on who's factual, who's not, who's right, or who's wrong. And that's what Monique did. both people are sitting in the energy of the sign that they represent. And the lessons that come from this is higher than them, because this is something for all of us to look at and to reflect, right? Because DL Hughly also has a point. And he's saying that if this was the case and what you're saying is valid, then you should have come and talked to me. That is the Pisces spiritual higher road approach, because Pisces deals with, see, the mutable signs deal with knowledge. Gemini, they deal with problems, right? Gemini defines the problem. Gemini says this is the problem. Virgo analyzes the problem, figures out the details of the problem. Sagittarius understands the problem. Pisces rises above the problem. So in this instance, with those four mutable signs, you have two of those signs, two of those lessons being played out and clashing against each other. Monique understands the problem. The problem, according to her, is that these people are, how can I say it? The YouTube algorithm is funny. The individuals that she mentioned, and she now included DL Hughly, these people are kind of schmoozing the buttocks of people in Hollywood, and they're not speaking truth, and they're doing things that's foul, and nobody's speaking out about it, and they're just going along to get along, and they're basically sellouts. So that's the understanding of the problem, which was already identified. Pisces, being that they rise above it, they're like, listen, this isn't the way to go. DL Hughly said you're burning bridges, and everything you do, you're like an arsonist, and you just watch the fire burn, and you're going to leave a trail of ashes, and nobody wants to work with you, which is what's happening now. So that's the Pisces method, is that there's a better way to do this. It's not the way that you're doing. So the lesson is, do you handle this situation and keep it quiet, and then deal with it on an individual basis, which is insight, and do you work on you in order to stop getting into these situations, even if it is a systemic problem? Is this the way to go about it, the way Monique's going about it? That's the Pisces, that's DL Hughly. Or is it the Sagittarius Monique approach, being that there's so much of this going on constantly, nobody's speaking out because it's this hush-hush policy, that it's time to blow this out the water, because according to her, she's doing it for her people, she's doing it for women, and she's doing it for her fellow comedians. And if somebody doesn't take up that torch or that cross, right, then it's never going to change, which is a typical Sagittarian. The Pisces is just let it go, let it flow. Things will work out in time. So these two energies clashing, the reason why I say it's bigger than these two comedians, because this is something that is going on in the world, right? It is the internal journey of being a better person versus your plight to being a bigger person being dampened and hindered by people in power putting obstacles and hurdles in your way that you either don't see or that you see, that's making it harder for you to be this spiritual higher person. So how do you deal with that? Do you keep it internal and then you work on it, you go around it, you rise above it, and you be better and greater? Or do you expose the truth so that more people can know, and then they also can work to fight it and remove these obstacles so you can be better? This is what's going on right now. So anytime you see conflicts like this, especially when you see squares in these crosses, pay attention, because this is bigger than them. And this is something that's going to be talked about, even no matter how this ends, whether they never speak to each other again and it gets extremely negative, or if they work it out and become peaceful. What's going to come out of this is it's going to be more exposure, more information is going to come to light from individuals that are doing the dirty deeds, and it's going to make everyone involved with their contracts, with their business, more thorough. Because now, because these two signs clashed, education came out of this. See, anytime you have mutable signs are the signs that deal with education. Your Gemini, your Virgo, your Sagittarius, your Pisces. Those are the signs of education. And whenever you see two signs of those four mutable signs clash in any way, trust and believe there's going to be a high level amount of knowledge that's going to come out of that clash, and understanding and wisdom, guaranteed. So what's happening now, let's just look at that. Monique she said, well, let's see who's telling the truth. Pull out the contract. She pulled out the contract. Now, when she did that, she also pulled from her opposite sign of Gemini. Each sign has a polar opposite, a direct polar opposite, in which they have opposite characteristics of that polar opposite sign, and they also pull from what's called the shadow. So they pull from the elements of that sign as they grow and improve in their nature. So Sagittarius, as they improve and they get better, they start to learn the attributes of a Gemini. Gemini is the sign that rules contracts. So when you see Monique say, pull out the contract, and she pulls out the contract, she just pulled out from her polar opposite sign Gemini, which is also a part of that energy, to reflect what's the truth. She's being herself, right? And, well, what did DL Hughly do? He also used Gemini and pulled out his deal memo. So now you have a battle of paperwork, which is all Gemini, which is all contracts and language. So both of them use their brother sign, their mutable sign of Gemini, in order to speak the truth. So both of them are sitting in their truth, they're sitting in the truth, and they're both pulling on energies that's natural to them and opposite of them in order to publicly release what is the truth. And that's how all of us benefit, is by paying attention to that. Yeah, we got the gossip. Yeah, we got the ignorance and the low frequency stuff. But above all that, which is what Pisces represents and Sag represents, is the education. Sagittarius represent in-depth knowledge. So when looking at the contract, if you're in an industry that deals with contracts, if you're in their industry or any industry that deals with paperwork and specifics, you now know that that's important. You know, the same thing with Pisces and DL Hughly. They represent rising above it, because he said he didn't really want to go through this, but he had to defend his honor, because a lot of things in true Sagittarius nature was done that was flagrant and hit below the belt. So in defending his honor, he didn't have to, he chose to kind of defend himself with paperwork. And this is what happens when you have squares and square signs go at each other. That's the benefit of everything. So you have insight, which is Pisces, which is DL Hughly, versus Sagittarius, which is Monique, which is the outlook, which is the bigger picture. And they both pulled from their natural energies. And this is something that everybody has to look at, especially during this pandemic, because the main sign that runs this pandemic, the overlapping energy, the dominant energy that rules this pandemic, is Pisces, because Pisces rules pandemics. In America, we had a nationwide lockdown that began during Pisces. Pisces rules hospitals. Pisces rules institutions. Again, Pisces rules pandemics. Pisces rules the helpless, those that cannot help themselves. So this is very important, because all of these things come into play, and they're reflected in this back and forth, and it's reflected by DL Hughly, because he's saying and standing on his square that it can't be everyone else if the common denominator is you, which is a Pisces lesson, which ultimately deals with the unconscious. A lot of times when we have trouble, even when people do something to us, it's stuff that we attract, right? Anything that you go through in the physical is a reflection of the internal, even if it's accidents. Things that people relate to chance and probability are not chance and probability. They are things that reflect your unconscious and your subconscious, which is ruled by Pisces. So right now, being that Pisces runs this pandemic, people are faced with the choices and the hard reality of having to go inside themselves to deal with a situation that is new, that is drastic, that is scary. And you can't get through those situations by blaming others. You can't get through those situations by looking to the external. You go through those situations by looking inside of you and pulling out from what you have, what you're dealt with, and your own abilities in order to rise above, which is Pisces, to get into a situation that's beneficial for you. All of that is Pisces energy, which is what's represented down during this pandemic, and which is what's playing out in this exchange between DL and Monique. But another sign that runs this pandemic is Sagittarius, because Sagittarius deals with traveling, long distance travel. What happened during this pandemic? Long distance travel was halted, right? Because we was locked down. So that's an attack on Sagittarius. So now you have an energy that for these 2 years have been under attack, right? But they've also been in power because Sagittarius rules what? Sagittarius rules food and drink. So even though people was locked down, what happened? They was forced to consume more because they stayed home. People gained weight. People drank more alcohol, right? They was excessive in things that they wouldn't be excessive in. So even though Sagittarius energy was attacked, they was also in power. And during this pandemic, America's governor was Mario Cuomo, who was another Sagittarius, right? So you have to look at these things. Anything that you see in the media, anything that you see played out, that's news, that's headlines, especially during this pandemic, you have to pay attention to these signs, especially the ones that's in power, because these are the energies that people are crying out to be released right now. People are crying out to travel. People are crying out to enjoy themselves. People are crying out to have fun. All of that is Sagittarius. People are crying out for higher spiritual aspects. People are crying out for higher reflection, right? So you have a clash between wanting to call out truth, because there's a lot of shady things going on during this pandemic, right? Shady things is what Monique was calling out with DL Hughly, the industry, and her peer group. That's what Sagittarius does. They are social justice reformers. They carry out justice, and they carry out social norms. That is a Sagittarius thing. Whenever those things are violated, a Sagittarius does not care about being tactful. They don't care about your feelings. They don't care about none of that except what's right, because social justice was violated. So this is what we're seeing. Social responsibility versus internal development. And those things clash because sometimes your internal development is hindered by social norms and social rules, so to speak. And if social rules are violated and there's a heightened unfairness that's going on, that impairs your ability to be a higher person. This is what DL Hughly and Monique represent. So whenever you see these two in the media, remember that. This is insight versus outlook, right? This is social justice versus internal reflection. And when those two things come together, even with the conflict, what comes out of that is the education that you have a right to speak your truth. You have a right to speak it to the world only after you have done the proper internal check boxes to correct yourself, to remain as spiritual as possible, and you've done the early precautions to make it a civil means of arbitration before you go take it to the world. So Monique, if she has done that, if she has taken it and spoke to DL Hughly, if she has went through all the proper procedures and still no recourse, according to her nature, she's absolutely justified in bringing it to the public. If she lied in any way, if she didn't take those recourses, then she has violated her role as upholding the social justice of the people that she's saying that she represents, and that's going to come to light. Same thing with DL Hughly. If DL Hughly is, because Pisces also deals with illusions and fantasy, right? So if DL Hughly in any way is holding up the fantasy and illusion that Monique is speaking against, then he is wrong. If he's not, and this situation with him, which is an individual situation of which he had nothing to do with those other parties that she mentioned, and according to him, it's really not about the system. If he's in the truth fully, and he's not upholding the illusions, he's not upholding the deceit of the system, his contract was in order, and he had full right to be headlined, then that will be shown. So this is what's going out. But at the end of the day, the people, even though it might not seem like it because they're bickering are the winners, because we all are learning the value of putting things in its proper context. Timing, knowing when to speak out, when not to speak out. Putting people in their place who's dirty, and then putting people in their place who's clean. And that's what this clash is going to show. It's going to show who's clean and who's dirty. So whenever you see this mutable cross, Sagittarius, Virgo, Gemini, Pisces, whenever they're clashing and they're present, then you know some higher form of knowledge is going to come about. So I just wanted to lay that down just to give some context so we can actually see this through a higher lens, as opposed to just being pulling down to blacks bickering and fighting in public again, which really doesn't happen with any other ethnicity like it does with us. So with that said, thank you for tuning in. I know this was a lot, but had to lay it down for those that rock with the video. Thank you very much. Even if you don't, I welcome opinions. And that was that. Peace.